The Magna Carta becomes a magnificent 64-paragraph document that for the first time in the history of the world puts some constraints on the king, some constraints on the queen, some constraints on central government. And when you do that, you open up a little spot of freedom. And when you open up that little spot of freedom, then we began to see in the 15th through the 18th century the rise of capitalism. And then in the 16th and 17th and 18th century, we begin to see some economic growth, the rise of Western Europe. And then in the 19th and 20th century, we see the rise of the United States. And now that we're into the 21st century, we'll see the rise of the rest. Some of the world is doing pretty well, for sure. But half of the world's population only makes $2 a day. 3 billion people on the planet have never used a telephone. The printing press made us all readers. The radio made us all listeners. Television made us all viewers. But the internet made us all producers. That's where the world is today. I think most economists would say the two most important variables to produce prosperity, besides, of course, freedom and that sort of thing, but is taxes and tariffs. So you have to talk about taxes and you have to talk about tariffs. And we must get back to a free trade world because it's going to be win-win mutual gains from voluntary exchange. Our think tank, the National Center for Policy Analysis, we've monitored 165 countries over the last 22 years. 22 years ago, there were 17 countries in the world that we would call Lockean or partly Lockean in freedom. Free or mostly free is how we would define it. 17 countries out of 165. And in our last index of economic freedom, 22 years later, the year is now 2008, there are 81 countries on the planet that are free or mostly free. Countries that are heading towards freedom and markets and capitalism and prosperity. 10 years ago, Romania had an 80% tax rate. Today, 15%. 10 years ago, Romania had 22% tariffs on free trade. Now, 5%. As this growth goes on, it's a win-win for the United States. When they do well, we will even do better, as a matter of fact. When Taiwan and South Korea were third world countries, who cared? But when Taiwan and South Korea began to grow economically, who ranks as our number 4, number 7 agricultural export countries? Win-win. Mutual gains from voluntary exchange. We've been hearing about energy, running out of oil, 1970, Time magazine, or the oil era is over, production's going to go down. We heard it in the 80s, heard it in 90. In 2004, National Geographic gave a whole issue on energy and said, that's it. The era of cheap energy is certainly over, but the oil fields are pretty well drilled out, and energy production is going to just go down, down, down. Interestingly, it's not about over now. As a matter of fact, 2008, we produced more oil than any time in world history over a year. In 2008, they ended up by saying that proven oil reserves are now 1,000 billion barrels of proven reserve. Never have we had a number that high. So isn't it interesting? As the earth keeps using more and more oil, proven oil reserves seem to go up, up, and up. In the United States alone, for heaven's sakes, we have 85 billion barrels of proven oil reserve in the outer continental shelf. We have 420 trillion cubic feet of gas in the outer continental shelf. We have a Saudi Arabia up in Alaska if we would care to drill. We say nuclear is off limits. France went from 30% energy independent to 50% energy independent. How did France do that? The last 30 years, it built 58 nuclear reactors. How many did we build? 0. We can do things like ethanol. Ethanol, it takes 10,000 gallons of water to make 5 gallons of ethanol. It takes 10,000 gallons of water to make 2 gallons of biodiesel. We talk about wind. There's a couple of problems with wind. One is it's a very expensive way of generating electricity. But number two, if we were going to put up windmills to generate just Manhattan, New York, that's all, just Manhattan, New York, we need all of Connecticut of windmills, all of Connecticut. Can you imagine the whole state filled with windmills? Have you ever heard the noise of that? Our national energy policy is not about developing energy, it's in the business of stopping energy.